This is a protein skimmer and it belongs on that Sea Cardinal 22-gallon all-in-one down there. And today in this video, we're going to go over protein skimmers, tell you everything that you need to know about them, and maybe even tell you some things that might be a little surprising. Let's talk about it. So the basic idea of a protein skimmer for a saltwater aquarium is this thing is a device. And through something called foam fractionation, it removes some organic and some inorganic dissolved compounds from the water in our aquariums, which helps us to maintain proper nutrient levels in our tanks. Now, this very much simulates the process that happens in the ocean when you start seeing foam washing up on the beaches of the ocean. This is doing exactly the same thing, and it operates by introducing air into the water column and churning that air into microbubbles. The stuff that we don't want basically sticks onto those microbubbles, and then they are removed in some way. The ocean does this by shoving it up onto the beach and allowing it to be filtered back through the sand as it goes back into the water. But in our case, it collects in a cup in the top of the protein skimmer, removing it from the water column. Then we can clean that cup out and export those nutrients out of the tank. Now, the advent of the protein skimmer cannot be contributed to just one person, but the very first hobbyist grade protein skimmers were introduced onto the market in the 1960s, believe it or not, by the people over at Tunzi. I probably said that wrong, and I apologize if I did. But the really cool thing about these devices is that even all the way back to the 1960s, they really haven't changed all that much. Taking a look at this, you can pretty much see that there is still a chamber where the bubbles and the water are going to go. It's going to turn into foam. There's still a collection cup at the top, and there's still a pump involved. Now, how we arrange those pumps and air intakes and things around on the protein skimmers make them a little more efficient, or some are a little less efficient than others, but they're all basically the same thing. In our case, with most modern skimmers, kind of like this one, there's usually a pump at the bottom, somewhere near the bottom of the main chamber here, that's going to pump water and air into this main chamber. It's going to tumble around in here, and then it's going to go through the neck, and the dry foam will spill over into the collection cup at the top. Now, one of the main things that makes a skimmer more or less efficient than another design are how many microbubbles it can actually produce and how long those bubbles stay inside this chamber, the dwell time of those bubbles inside the chamber. For a very long time, small skimmers like this were really not that effective at all because there wasn't enough dwell time inside this body of the skimmer. But we're getting a lot better with that these days, and something as small as this, or sometimes even a little smaller, like the Bubble Magus Mini Q, which is a great little skimmer for super small nano tanks and stuff like that, we're actually getting these things to perform pretty well. In a minute, we're going to cover a bunch of different types of skimmers and how you want to size your skimmer to go along with your aquarium. But before we get into that, let's talk about what these things actually remove from the aquarium. Spoiler alert, it's not fish poop. So what people have said for a very long time as a super simple definition is skimmers remove dissolved organic compounds from the water. But that is not completely true. It's true in part, but only about a third of what's removed from the water column and ends up in our skimmer cup is actually dissolved organics. The rest of it is organics or inorganic compounds that are not completely dissolved at all, and some of the things that actually get pulled out are microflora from the tank, like algae and bacteria and even some phytoplankton. It's actually fair to say that the majority of what's removed from the water are not dissolved compounds at all. Most of what is removed and actually ends up in our collection cup are tiny particles of different things like calcium and magnesium and some silicates. A good portion of it is also the hard shell from diatomaceous algae and things like that. And they even remove some things, some small organisms that would generally consume nitrates and phosphates. So with all of that said, it begs the question, should we even be using these things at all to remove that stuff? And honestly, the answer to that question is maybe. In my personal opinion, the benefits of actually using a skimmer on the tank far outweigh the cons of not having one on your aquarium. Let's talk about the different types of skimmers that are available and how they might fit into your situation. Of course, there are hang-on-the-back skimmers like the one I'm showing you here, And I have this installed on my 40-gallon frag tank because presently this tank is not connected to a sump or any other type of filtration system, so it works best for me to just have one that hangs on the back. But hang on the back skimmers can present a challenge because skimmers don't always act like we want them to act, and we're going to talk about skimmer overflow here in a minute as well. The next most common type is probably an in-sump skimmer, and I'm showing you mine here. Although my sump is not running now, this is what they do. They sit down inside the sump, and I like these models because even if the skimmer cup overflows or something like that, it's just going to go right back into the sump, and you're not going to have any problems associated with it other than cleaning it up and cleaning up the mess inside the sump. It's contained, and that's really important to me. There is another type of skimmer that looks very much like an in-sump model, but it's designed to sit outside next to the sump, somewhere next to the aquarium, and this is called an external skimmer. It's external to any of the aquarium stuff. It just sits over here by itself, and you run plumbing to and from it, and it's its own standalone thing. Usually we don't have to run this type of a skimmer unless you're running a very big system, one where fitting that size of a skimmer into a sump is just really completely impractical. But they absolutely do a great job if you can manage any potential overflow situation. Found within these three types of skimmers, there are additional types of skimmers called single pass or recirculating. And the basic idea behind this, a single pass skimmer, is much like the one that I was showing you before, where it's just one pump, it sends the water and air through the skimmer, and that's it. In a recirculating model, there are additional pumps that bring water from the body of the skimmer through the pump, through a needle wheel, just to churn the water up into bubbles even more, and they send it right back to the body of the skimmer. They recirculate the water inside the skimmer body before it gets all used up and expelled out the bottom. Now, basically what this does is add more bubbles and more dwell time to the skimmers. Now, this used to be really popular, and it's still actually really popular for like big, massive aquariums where the skimmers are like the size of a modern pickup truck, because they need that amount of bubble, production and dwell time to pull what they need to pull out of the water. But for most of us with a home aquarium these days, we don't have to get into recirculating skimmers unless you have a really, really, really high bio load in your aquarium. But with the pumps and the needle wheels and the things that we have available these days, we have gotten skimmers to the point where they're so efficient that a single pass really gets the job done for most of us, and we don't have to go down that road of recirculating. But it's pretty cool tech, no doubt. And there are even more options when it comes to how the air gets injected into the skimmer. There are Venturi style, which just use a literal Venturi to suck air in through a high pressure zone in the intake pipe for the water. There are needle wheel style, where they just draw air right into the mouth of the pump and it churns through the wheel. There's a style of skimmer that's used usually in commercial applications called a Beckett skimmer, and those look absolutely ridiculous with tubes and pipes and pumps and stuff going everywhere. And you can even make a skimmer out of something as simple as a water bottle, believe it or not, and an air stone. This used to be how skimmers worked back in the day, and they worked actually really well before we had pumps with needle wheels and all that stuff. We would use air pumps and wooden air stones, or even DIY air stones, to create the bubble cloud in the body of the skimmer. And it still works. And if you were going to DIY your own skimmer, this is absolutely a way that you could go. Now, I wanted to talk about all that stuff just to give you an idea about all of the potential stuff that's out there on the market. But most of the time these days, with what we have going on in the hobby now, you're just going to be able to go find one that's rated for your tank and put it on your aquarium, and you don't have to worry about anything else. It's going to do the job, and all you have to worry about is getting it tuned and set just right. So how do you pick what the right skimmer for your tank is? And basically, the general rule is that you're going to need to match your skimmer size and type to the bio load that you're going to be having in your aquarium. The little 22-gallon Sea Cardinal here is not going to have a massive bio load in it, and it's a fairly small aquarium. Of course, it comes with its own skimmer, which is one of the benefits of buying that particular all-in-one setup. But let's just say you had something like a BioCube 32. You're not going to want to get a skimmer that can support 100 gallons of water for that 32-gallon system. You want to look at something like an ice cap K1-50. It's a K1 model, and it can support up to 50 gallons of water, which is going to mean that you could run your bio load in your BioCube a little bit heavier because that skimmer's rated for up to 50 gallons of water. In my case, with my big main display that I'm getting ready to do a bonsai aquascape in here soon, I'm running a K1 200. And that's another ice cap model. It's still that K1 model, but it can support up to 200 gallons or even a little bit more depending on the bio load. Now, I usually run my big aquarium at a lighter bio load, and even though it's 300 gallons of total system volume, the 200-gallon skimmer gets done what I need to get done. The main thing that you have to keep in mind here is that it needs to fit, obviously, within the confines of your system, but it needs to balance with the tank. You don't want to install a skimmer that's much too small or a skimmer that's much too large, because over skimming or under skimming is definitely a thing. You can absolutely skim a tank so heavily that you strip out all of the nutrients from the aquarium. You take your nitrates and your phosphates down to zero or close to it, and then you're going to end up with other problems. And this leads directly into the topic of how long should you run your skimmer for. Now, that completely depends on many different things, and one of those things are the nutrient levels in your aquarium. If your nitrates and phosphates are being maintained at the correct levels where you want them, you might be able to run your skimmer 24/7 all the time. But if you notice that your nutrients start dropping lower than you want them to be, you might decide to cut your skimmer back and only run it 12 hours a day. It really is just dependent on what's going on in the tank, and you're going to have to tune your skimmer, pay attention and test your tank, and find that balance, that sweet spot where you're still removing enough, but you're not removing too much, and it keeps those nutrients at that even keel right where you want them to be. This is something you're going to have to play with. Skimmers are not a set them and forget them type of situation. You're going to have to clean that thing all the time, and you're going to have to be monitoring the tank and tune it with the aquarium to get it into that situation where everything stays right where it needs to be. Now, earlier I was talking about some of the benefits of skimmers, and before we get to the actual tuning and setup of these things, let's talk about some of the good stuff that happens when you put a skimmer on your aquarium. One of the main things right off the bat is an extreme amount of oxygenation to the aquarium. So if you have a tank that has a little lower flow, maybe the surface agitation is not super choppy, you don't have a lot of gas exchange going on that surface, the skimmer is going to do that job for you, and it's going to do it to a wild degree. If you have a skimmer on your aquarium, you're never going to have to worry about oxygenation. Another one of the awesome benefits is because of this additional oxygenation and all of this contact of air to water going on in the skimmer, CO2 is released from the air and from the water in your tank, and that's going to allow your pH to come up just a little bit and also stabilize across the board. I have tracked my own tanks before and seen a situation where the pH was really spiking and dropping every day, like one whole point. But installing a skimmer on that tank allowed that pH to stabilize. Now, it's still going to go through its rhythm every day, but the peak and valley, the spike and everything was much less than it was than before I put the skimmer on the tank. So it just stabilizes things, and that's a really awesome benefit. Now, I have another video on my channel that talks about CO2 Scrubbers, which is a device that you can use alongside a skimmer in conjunction with the skimmer to raise your pH even a few more points if you need to. It's just a thing that I thought I would mention, and we're not going to go into it in depth in this video, but if that's a problem that you're having with consistently low pH, you can look into that as a potential fix. All right, so let's move on next, and we'll talk a little bit about placement and setup of the skimmer in your aquarium. One of the main things that you want to make sure that you have with your skimmer is a consistent water level in the tank. Even if you have a hang on the back skimmer, the water level fluctuating up and down above the pump is going to put more or less pressure on the mouth of that pump on the intake, and it's going to make that skimmer perform better or worse when the water is higher versus lower. In the same sort of mindset, if you have your skimmer in a section in your sump that changes water with evaporation, it's going to make that skimmer work or not work, or perform well or not perform well as that water level changes. The tuning on these things is actually pretty sensitive. And if your water level is changing all the time, it is going to be a nightmare for you to get that thing dialed in. I would even go as far as to say is that it's an absolute requirement to install a skimmer into a chamber or onto an aquarium where the water level doesn't change at all. Now, every different skimmer is going to have a different method or a different way that you tune it. Some of them have valves on the intake of the pump to control water flow. Some of them have valves that control how much water is output through the drain. Others have valves that go on the air intake where you control how much air is going in the skimmer. Some of them have all of that or any combination thereof. This particular skimmer is controlled by how high or low you mount this thing in the aquarium. So if I mount it way down here and the water level is way up here, this skimmer is going to always be overflowing water into the cup. But if we scooch this down just like this, where now the water level is here, it has time to be for those bubbles to dwell in here. That's just how this one's done. You physically raise or lower this thing in the water column to tune it. It's the only way this one can be tuned. Ultimately, you're going to have to read through the instructions for the skimmer that you have and figure out how your manufacturer wants that particular model to be tuned. One of the things that people find out the hard way sometimes is that skimmers have a break-in period. Now, I'm going to tell you a tip in a minute for how you can minimize this break-in period, but basically what this is when you put a skimmer on an aquarium, it is not going to perform as it should for a couple of days up to a week or more sometimes. Now, you can mitigate this just a little bit by washing that entire skimmer before you ever install it on your aquarium in a solution of warm water with some distilled white vinegar in it. Just give it a good wash, rinse it off, dry it, and then install it into the tank. That will speed things up for you, sometimes allowing it to break in just a day or so. Hey, by the way, if you think that this video is informative or it's helping you in some way, please hit that subscribe button, turn the little bell on and all that stuff. And if you've been here for a while, if you have gained multiple experience, knowledge type things out of my videos, would you consider joining as a YouTube channel member? You can find that in the description below, and any contribution you make in that way absolutely helps me out and keeps allowing me to be able to do this for free. But what we mean by a skimmer has to break in is it needs to develop a biofilm on the inside of the skimmer body before it actually starts working as it should. And you'll know when this happens because the foam that's on the inside of the skimmer, it'll just be boiling right at the surface. And as that process takes place, as that biofilm gets built up, that foam will go from boiling right on the surface of the water inside the skimmer, and it will start building a dry foam head above that sort of boiling water area in the skimmer. That dry foam is what we're after. That's going to go up the neck of the skimmer, and that's what's going to spill over into the cup. So if you have that boiling foam head set right at the top of your skimmer neck, that's too high. You want to bring that down some. I have another video on my channel that goes more in depth into tuning your skimmers. I'll link it at the end of this one so you can check that video out. But just know that when you install that thing, it's going to have to break in for a few days before it starts working right. So I would suggest that you just leave it turned all the way down until it starts building that dry foam and then try to tune it. Now, you can run a skimmer in different ways. We call it running it wet or running it dry. Now, when you run a skimmer wet, you're going to be pushing that foam head further up the neck of that skimmer, and it's going to be pulling more water into the collection cup. The resulting skimmate is going to be less dense. It's going to be more watery, more clear, stuff like that. Now, this is fine. You can run your skimmer this way, and it is good to run it this way in certain cases if you're trying to reduce nutrients more quickly, or even if you're trying to do a water change while you reduce nutrients. Some people will let a skimmer run wet, let it drain from that skimmer into a bucket, and that's how they do their water change, pulling out that concentrated nutrient rich water rather than just swapping water out. It's a method that does work. It's not something that you have to do, but it is a way to do that if you want to pull out more concentrated nutrients from your aquarium during that water change. On the flip side, you could skim very dry, which is usually what I do with my tanks. And in this case, you tune the skimmer so that the foam has to be really dry before it comes out into the collection cup. It really doesn't collect a whole lot of water at all in the cup for several days, up to a week or maybe even 10 days. It's very dark, very concentrated, and this is basically removing nutrients more slowly over time, and you don't have to clean out the skimmer cup as often, and it's not removing as much water from the tank itself, requiring a little less topping off of replacing that water. Now, it is important to note that if you're skimming very wet, it might drop the salinity in your tank over time. So just keep an eye on that. You may have to top off with some salt water every now and then if you choose to skim your tank really wet all the time. Now, earlier I mentioned that sometimes skimmers will overflow the cup, and most decent skimmers these days, much like this one, come with a drain on the cup. So it's absolutely possible for you to pop that drain, put a tube on this into a bucket or something like that. If this thing is overflowing while it's breaking in or whatever, what I do with these, and what I'm probably going to do with this one if I can't get it tuned right, is just run a tube back into the tank. Let the skimmer run, let it run down through that tube and go back into the aquarium for the first few days until it breaks in. And then I'll take the tube off and put the plug in, and the skimmer will start working normally. But you have to be careful with hang on the back skimmers, because if you don't tune them correctly and they don't have a cup drain, some of them don't. The one that I have on my 40 doesn't. It can overflow that cup, and that goes onto your floor. So you just have to be very sure, very careful. I would not set a skimmer up, a hang on the back skimmer on a new tank, and then go to sleep. I would set that thing up in the morning, and that way you can watch it all day long, see what it's going to do. And if it starts just pushing nothing but water over into the cup, you'll be there to do something about it. But that is the main downfall of a hang on the back type of skimmer, is that they can make a really big mess for you sometimes. Now, sometimes you may go to your skimmer and find that there is no foam production happening at all, even though it was happening before, maybe yesterday or for the whole last week. It's been working well, but it's not doing it right now. And this is completely normal. And in this situation, if your skimmer was running well before, but it's doing this now and you didn't change anything, my advice would be to just leave it alone. Something changed in the tank. Maybe the tangs went crazy and pooped all over the place or something like that. And it caused a shift in the water chemistry in the tank, which caused that foam head to die back. Have you ever poured like a cup of soda or whatever, and then you stuck your finger in it to kill the foam on the top of the drink? This is the same sort of idea here. Something went into the tank, might have been dust, maybe it was fish poop, maybe it was oils of some kind, maybe a wrasse was sleeping and it woke up and shook off its, mucus cocoon, and that got chopped up by the skimmer, who knows. The main point here that I'm trying to make is, if you didn't change anything, just leave it alone. It'll come back. The foam head will come back in a day or so, and it'll go right back to the way that it was. But this can also happen when we make changes to the tank. Dosing anything into the tank, feeding the tank, putting your hands in the tank, any change you make to the aquarium can make that skimmer stop producing foam, and it almost always will. In this situation as well, all you need to do is leave that skimmer alone, let it reestablish its sort of whatever, its situation, and it'll go back to working like it should. But you do need to definitely be aware, and for those of you who have stuck around to this point, let me know if this has ever happened to you. Some medications can make a skimmer go absolutely nuts, and Chemiclean is probably the most famous one for this. If you put Chemiclean in your tank, they recommend that you continue running the skimmer because that chemicline is going to strip the oxygen out of the water. So they offset that by telling you to run the skimmer. But it makes the skimmer go absolutely nuts. It will overflow a skimmer within minutes of you putting that stuff in the aquarium. Flux RX does the same thing, and there are other medications and stuff that you can put in the tank that are going to make that skimmer overflow. So if you're going to be medicating your tank, make sure that you are ready for whatever situation that you have with your skimmer to take and, react to whatever problem it may be causing. If you have a hang on the back skimmer, absolutely install a drain line before you ever put those medications in that tank. And if your hang on the back skimmer doesn't have a drain line, I would not recommend you try to run that thing while you have those medications in the tank. It is going to overflow. It's not going to not do it. It will overflow. Okay. So just take this information that I'm giving you and put it in the back of your brains for if you get to that point one day. Don't run chemicline with a hang on the back skimmer. You're going to be mopping up water off of the floor. So basically what I'm getting at here is know what to expect before you start adding anything to the tank. If you're going to change your trace element dosing and things like that, you're going to have to watch the skimmer. You might have to tune it a little bit after that, because it's going to react differently as the water chemistry in the tank changes. That was 37 minutes of recording. I don't know how many minutes of actual video that I'm going to have at this point. Pretty interesting to see how this comes out. But I said all of that to get to this part here. Do you actually need to run a skimmer on your aquarium? That is totally up to you. It is entirely possible to run a successful saltwater aquarium without a protein skimmer. It is not a required piece of equipment. I personally think that the benefits of running one outweigh not having one on the tank myself, but it's not required. One of the nicest tanks that I have ever seen was a mixed reef run with hang on the back equipment, and he did not have a skimmer on that tank. He did weekly 20% water changes, and that was it. So don't let anyone ever tell you that you absolutely have to have a protein skimmer on your aquarium. And don't let you convince yourself that not having one is what's wrong with your tank, because that's not the case either. It's just a tool that we can have in our toolbox that helps us manage our parameters and maybe helps us find some success. All right, so I've got my skimmer set for the sea Cardinal, ready to go into the chamber, and this is where I would recommend that you install yours as well. So you want to just be very careful as you're putting this down in here. Make sure it doesn't get caught on any lines or anything like that. And we're going to hang this thing right there. I have this skimmer currently set where the little height ring is just above this part right here. That's the outflow for the skimmer. So we're going to get this put down in here, and I'm going to put it right in the middle of this area, tighten up these screws on this side, and we'll be ready to plug this thing in. All right, so I wanted to give you a better look at how and where I installed this. So if you're using my 3D printed components, the media rack will go right here in the second chamber, and the skimmer should hang on this glass, still in the second chamber, and that's where I would have you put it. All right, so I took my microphone off. There's one more thing that I wanted to show you with this. If I pop the lid on right quick, I'm not sure if you can hear that, but depending on how the lid is turned, it does make a little bitty bit of noise, but I don't think it's going to be a big deal. I'm actually going to be 3D printing a CO2 scrubber lid for the top of this that we can connect to this tube here, so that'll hold it down. But I might just set something heavy on it right there just for now to hold it down, because if I do that, it's completely silent. Just thought you should know. There's two videos on screen right now. One is the one I was telling you about earlier for tuning skimmers, and this one is what YouTube recommends that you would want to watch next. So watch one of those, and I'll see you over there.